If you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably noticed that there's topics that you just seemingly can't talk about. For example, race, religion, gender. If you so much have an idea which is contradictory to the common way of thinking, then you're completely disregarded or shunned even. That's typically what's referred to as being outside the Overton window, right? The Overton window is what's acceptable to say right now. Not what's right, not what people say in private, not what people personally think, but what's socially acceptable. A protected concept kind of sits right in the middle of the window. The idea itself is firmly inside, and any criticism of that idea gets pushed outside immediately. Humans are social creatures, and so naturally they're very scared of punishment, and so the Overton window itself is kind of where the lines have fallen over time. And protected concepts are artificial lines which have been established typically by somebody with some form of power. There's an important distinction I want to make, and that's that this position of power doesn't always have to be some traditional authority or something like that. It doesn't have to be, your boss or the president or your parents. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It's just anything with leverage, right? So there's leverage in certain situations. For example, if you're liberal and your boss is conservative, then they have leverage over you because you say something you don't like, you criticize them, and they can fire you, right? And then the same thing goes with, and I think you see it most commonly, especially nowadays, under the concept of race and ethnicity, where you can't criticize certain races, not because that race has direct authority over you or direct power over you, but because they have leverage in certain situations. Race and religion are two areas where the protected concepts do the most damage, because when you make them untouchable, you stop people from telling the truth about anything that actually touches them. For example, you can't fix racial problems if you're not allowed to describe them honestly. And so any discussion of race that isn't purely flattering ends up getting labeled as racist. And therefore, policymakers, teachers, journalists, citizens, everyday people get scared to talk honestly about it. They get scared to talk honestly about, failing school numbers, crime, policy, safety, family structure, social trust. Naturally, these problems end up going undiscussed, which leads to them being unmeasured and then inevitably unfixed, right? And so if you look at the 1965 Moynihan Report, it illustrated a lot of these things, but because it was a protected category, things have only gotten worse. Additionally, people begin to conflate attacks on ideas with attacks on people. Saying, this doctrine is false. I don't believe in Islam. Ends up getting conflated with, I hate everyone who follows this religion. Everyone who follows this religion is bad. Turning an intellectual critique into a personal attack. On the same line, the word racist becomes a weapon to shut down questions. And as, kind of an additional effect, the word racist stops meaning, you're dehumanizing people based on race or, something to that effect, and then begins to mean you question a narrative that mentions race because people view it as, holy. People view it as sacred, and they don't want people to touch it. People learn to use accusations of racism as shield against debate. Data, evidence, and trade-offs tend to just completely vanish because people end up panicking, or they just hear a concept and completely shut away. On the flip side, this also breeds genuine racial hatred. People who notice these things aren't allowed to criticize races freely, and therefore, in the public, everybody agrees 100%, but in private, they say, hey, I don't really agree with that. If people can't talk normally about race without just being, obliterated, they won't become less racist. They'll just become silent and angry and alienated. You're able to criticize some races completely freely, while others, it's just completely unthinkable. This completely undermines the very idea of equality that these groups, these people claim to care about. Let me encourage you to think in terms of arguments and evidence and not taboos and social punishments. You should always be striving towards the higher man, always be striving to be a better version of yourself, And if you're in the group that believes protected concepts are a good thing, maybe hear out some contradictory arguments, right? Hear some contradictory opinions, because all it can do is make you more informed. On one hand, you sharpen your own argument, and on the other, you can adjust to a more informed argument. But if you abstain completely, then all you're doing is remaining ignorant to the real situation. Make sure to like and subscribe if you made it this far, and make sure to leave a comment. Any and all criticism is completely welcomed. Yeah, thanks for watching. Until next time.